My name is Bianca Ruby. I am 29 years old. 5 years ago, my stepfather looked me in the eye the night we buried my mother and said, "Your mother left everything to me. The house, the accounts, all of it. You need to start making plans to leave." He handed me a printed piece of paper and called it her will. I believed him. I packed one suitcase, took my mother's pearl earrings from her dresser, and carried out the only thing he told me to throw away, a periwinkle blue dollhouse she built with her own hands when I was 5. I drove 70 miles south to Richmond with $340 in my bank account and no family to call. For 5 years, I thought my mother had chosen him over me. For 5 years, he lived in her house, spent her money, and told everyone I was on drugs. Then last month, while repairing that dollhouse for my 3-year-old daughter, I found a false floor in the attic room. Underneath it was a sealed envelope in my mother's handwriting. Inside was her real will, notarized, dated 6 months before she died. She left everything to me. Every dollar, every room, every rose in that garden. Greg's forged document was not worth the paper it was printed on, and he had no idea I was coming. 2 weeks ago, on September 14th, the 5th anniversary of my mother's death, my stepfather hosted his annual memorial garden party at her house in Charlottesville. 40 guests on the lawn, white roses from the garden my mother planted 15 years ago, catered food. Greg in his Brooks Brothers blazer, shaking hands, accepting condolences like a man who had earned them. He stood on the porch with a glass of champagne, mid-sentence, telling a neighbor how much he missed his beautiful wife. Then he saw me walking through the front gate. I carried the dollhouse under my left arm, a manila folder in my right hand. My husband, James, walked beside me. In the car parked at the curb, my daughter Noah sat in her car seat next to Claudette, the woman who gave me a second chance when I had nothing. Greg's champagne glass stopped halfway to his mouth. His smile held for 1 second, 2, then collapsed like wet paper. The roses smelled exactly the way I remembered. My mother's roses, not his. Before I tell you what happened at that garden party, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story genuinely resonates with you. Drop a comment letting me know where you are watching from and what time it is there, and tell me how old you are. I am curious who is listening right now on Sophia Told Stories. Now let me take you back to September 2019, to a funeral in Charlottesville, Virginia, and the last night I ever saw my mother's house as my home. But to understand why I was standing on that porch with a dollhouse and a folder full of proof, you need to know what happened the night my mother was buried. My mother died on a Sunday morning, September 8th, 2019, pulmonary embolism at UVA Medical Center. She was 52 years old. The nurse who called me at 6:14 a.m. said it happened fast, that she probably did not suffer, that her body simply stopped. I was living in my mother's house in Charlottesville at the time, finishing my last semester at a community college design program. I had been asleep in my childhood bedroom when the phone rang. I remember the sound of my bare feet on the hardwood hallway. I remember the kitchen light already on, Greg sitting at the table with a mug of coffee, dressed, showered, reading something on his phone. He looked up when I came down the stairs. My face must have told him everything. He set the mug down slowly and said, "When is the service?" Not, "What happened?" Not, "Is she gone?" Not, "Are you okay?" "When is the service?" That was the first thing out of his mouth while my knees buckled against the kitchen door frame and I grabbed the counter to stay standing. He had already moved on to logistics while I was still trying to breathe. The funeral was held 3 days later at a small Episcopal church on Rugby Road. My mother had attended that church for 20 years. She served on the flower committee. She brought lemon pound cake to every potluck. The nave was full, maybe 150 people. UVA colleagues from the English department, where she had worked as an administrative coordinator for 18 years. Neighbors from the Belmont district. Friends she had collected over a lifetime of being the kind of person who remembered your birthday and showed up at your door with soup when you were sick. The air smelled like lilies and old hymnals and candle wax. I sat in the front pew in a black dress I had borrowed from my mother's closet, because I did not own one. It still smelled like her. Shalimar by Guerlain. The scent hit me when I pulled it over my head that morning, and I had to sit on the bathroom floor for 10 minutes with my face pressed against the fabric. Greg sat beside me in a charcoal suit I had never seen before. Tags removed that morning. I found the price sticker in the bathroom trash. $480 from a men's store downtown. He had bought a new suit for my mother's funeral, not because he was grieving, because he was performing. I watched him during the service. His face was composed, serious, the mask of a man enduring private pain with public dignity. He nodded at the right moments during the eulogy. He squeezed my shoulder once when a hymn ended, timed precisely for when the woman across the aisle was looking. But his eyes were dry. Not once during the entire hour and 15 minutes did I see moisture in them. At the cemetery afterward, a photographer from the Daily Progress took pictures for the obituary. Greg positioned himself at the head of the casket, one hand resting on the polished mahogany, jaw set, chin down. The grieving husband. He held the pose for 3 seconds longer than natural, long enough for the shutter to click twice. I stood 6 feet behind him, forgotten, watching my mother's roses wilt in the September heat on top of the casket she would never touch again. After the burial, people came back to the house. My mother's house, a white Victorian on a tree-lined street in the Belmont neighborhood. 4 bedrooms, original hardwood floors, a wraparound porch with wisteria climbing the columns. My mother bought it in 2003 with money from my father's life insurance policy after he died of a heart attack when I was 7. She paid it off in 12 years. No mortgage. The house was hers, free and clear, long before Greg Lassiter appeared at a church picnic in 2010 and introduced himself with a firm handshake and a rehearsed smile. Neighbors brought casseroles and pie. Someone set up a coffee station in the kitchen. I moved through the rooms like a ghost, accepting hugs from people whose names I could not remember, nodding when they said she was a wonderful woman and she is in a better place. The house smelled like my mother. Every room. Her lavender sachets in the linen closet, her lemon dish soap by the kitchen sink, the faint trace of Shalimar on the throw pillows where she used to read. I kept pressing my fingers against surfaces she had touched, the banister she polished every spring, the windowsill where she kept her African violets, the door frame in the hallway where she had penciled my height every birthday from ages 5 through 18. The last mark read 5'6", April 2013. She had drawn a tiny star beside it. By 9 p.m., the last guest had left. I was in my childhood bedroom. My mother had preserved it exactly as I left it for community college. The lavender walls. The bookshelf stacked with Nancy Drew novels and AP textbooks. The desk where I had filled out my first design school application. And in the corner, on a small wooden stand, the dollhouse. Periwinkle blue, handmade, with real glass windows and working hinges on every tiny door. My mother spent 6 months building it for my 5th birthday. She carved the shutters from balsa wood and painted each room a different color. Sage green kitchen, butter yellow living room, sky blue bedroom. Greg called it clutter every Christmas when he rearranged the living room. My mother always moved it back to my room without a word. I was sitting on the bed, still wearing her black dress, touching the dollhouse's tiny front door with one finger, when I heard the footsteps in the hallway. Heavy, deliberate. Greg appeared in the doorway. He had removed his suit jacket, but not his tie. His sleeves were rolled to the elbows. He looked like a man who had come to conduct business. Bianca. His voice was flat, stripped of the warmth he had performed all day. We need to talk. I wiped my face with the back of my hand. Can it wait? No. He stepped inside the room, leaned against the door frame, crossed his arms. Your mother left everything to me. The words did not make sense at first. I stared at him, waiting for the rest of the sentence, the part that would include me, the house, the accounts, everything. He pulled a folded document from his back pocket and held it out. I took it with numb fingers. Standard white copy paper, laser printed, a heading that read, Last Will and Testament of Jolene Marie Ruby. I scanned the text. My eyes could barely focus. At the bottom, a signature. My mother's name, or something that looked like it. No notary seal, no witness signatures. She wanted me to take care of everything, Greg continued. He was watching my face the way a poker player watches an opponent. She knew you were not ready for this kind of responsibility. The property assessment came back at $1.1 million, plus her investment accounts. This is adult money, Bianca. I looked up at him. What about me? You will need to start making plans to leave. I could hear the tick of the hallway clock, the settle of the old house around us. Somewhere outside, a dog barked twice and stopped. Plans to leave, I repeated. This is my home. It was your mother's home. He straightened from the doorframe. Now it is mine. That is what she wanted. I suggest you respect her wishes. He turned and walked down the hall. His footsteps faded toward the study at the end of the corridor. A moment later, I heard a sound I would not understand for 5 years. The HP LaserJet Pro in the study hummed to life. 11:07 p.m. The mechanical whir of a document being scanned. I assumed he was printing thank you cards for the funeral guests. I pressed my face into my mother's pillow and cried until my ribs ached. At some point after midnight, I sat up and looked at the dresser. My mother's pearl stud earrings sat on the porcelain dish where she always kept them. Small, simple, the ones she wore every day. I picked them up. They were still warm from the lamplight. I closed my fingers around them and slipped them into the pocket of her black dress that I was still wearing. Then I looked at the dollhouse in the corner. Greg wanted it gone. He had told me that afternoon, before the guests arrived, gesturing at it with the hand that was not holding his champagne. Throw that thing in the dumpster. It is falling apart. My mother built it. I do not care. It is junk. She spent 6 months on it. Bianca. His voice had dropped to that register he used when patience was a prop. Get rid of it. I walked across the room, picked up the dollhouse, and held it against my chest. The tiny glass windows pressed cold against my collarbone. The hinge of the front door dug into my wrist. It smelled like wood glue and old paint, and something underneath that might have been Shalimar. He gave me 72 hours to leave. I packed 1 suitcase, my mother's pearl earrings, and the one thing Greg told me to throw in the dumpster, the dollhouse my mother built with her own hands when I was 5. I did not know yet what she had hidden inside it. I did not know that the answer to every question I would spend the next 5 years asking was sitting 3 inches from my fingers, sealed behind a false floor in a miniature attic, waiting for me to find it. 72 hours. That is how long Greg gave me to dismantle 24 years of living in the only home I had ever known. 3 days to sort through a lifetime while a man who had married into this house 10 years ago stood in the kitchen drinking coffee from my mother's favorite mug, the blue stoneware one she bought at a craft fair in Staunton, watching me carry boxes past him like I was a tenant being evicted. Which I suppose in his mind is exactly what I was. I did not sleep those 3 nights. I could not. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that printed document with my mother's name at the bottom, and I tried to make the letters rearrange themselves into something that made sense. She left everything to him. My mother, who kept her first husband's name on the deed. My mother, who maintained a separate bank account at Fidelity that Greg's name never touched. My mother, who once told me over lemon pound cake at the kitchen table that the house was my inheritance, that she had paid it off early so I would never have to worry. That woman left everything to Greg. The words did not fit in my mouth. They tasted like a lie, but I had no proof. And grief does something to your ability to reason. It fills the spaces where logic should be with a fog so thick you can barely find the door. I could not think clearly. I could barely stand. So I believed him, because believing him was easier than fighting him, and fighting required energy I had spent entirely on trying to breathe. On the 3rd morning, Wednesday, September 11th, I loaded my car, a 2011 Honda Civic with 189,000 miles on the odometer. The trunk held one suitcase. The back seat held the dollhouse. That was everything I was taking from 24 years of life in this house. One suitcase of clothes, a pair of pearl stud earrings in my pocket, and a periwinkle blue dollhouse that barely fit through the rear passenger door. The paint scraped against the door frame as I angled it inside. A thin line of blue transferred onto the gray vinyl. I winced, ran my thumb over the scratch on the dollhouse's side wall, and felt something catch under my nail. A seam in the wood, barely visible, running along the base of the attic room. I did not think about it then. I was too busy trying not to collapse in the driveway. Greg stood on the front porch with his arms crossed. He had not offered to help me carry anything. He had not asked where I was going. He watched me the way you watch movers clearing out an apartment. Professional distance, mild impatience, a schedule to keep. Behind him, through the screen door, I could see movement in the upstairs hallway. A woman I did not recognize at first, carrying a duffel bag toward the guest bedroom. Then I placed her. Becca Lassiter, Greg's daughter from his first marriage. She was 21 at the time, working part-time at a boutique in Short Pump. I had met her exactly 4 times in 10 years. She never came to Christmas. She never called on my mother's birthday. And now she was moving into my mother's house on the same morning I was being pushed out of it. I stopped loading the car and stared at the upstairs window. Becca appeared behind the glass of my old bedroom. My bedroom. The lavender walls were visible behind her. She was wearing something I recognized immediately. A cream-colored cashmere cardigan with tortoiseshell buttons. My mother's cardigan. The one she wore every autumn evening while reading on the porch. Becca looked down at me through the window. Our eyes met for 2 seconds. She did not wave. She did not look away. She pulled the cardigan tighter around her shoulders and stepped back from the glass. I turned to Greg. My hands were shaking, but my voice came out steady. She is wearing my mother's sweater. Greg glanced up at the window, then back at me. Your mother does not need it anymore. 7 words, delivered without inflection, the way you would note that the recycling goes out on Tuesdays. I opened my mouth and found nothing there. No argument, no anger, just the hollow sensation of a trapdoor opening beneath my feet. He uncrossed his arms and checked his watch. A Cartier Santos, new. I had never seen it before September. Do not come back, he said. Do not call. Your mother made her choice, Bianca. Respect it. He turned and walked inside. The screen door clapped shut behind him. I stood in the driveway for another 30 seconds, listening to the sound of Becca's footsteps creaking across the floor of my old room above me. The wisteria on the porch column swayed in a breeze that smelled like my mother's garden roses, the pink Edens she had planted the year she paid off the house. They were blooming late this year. She would have been proud of them. I got in the car, turned the key. The engine caught on the second try, the way it always did when the mornings turned cool. I pulled out of the driveway slowly because the dollhouse was unsecured in the back seat, and I could hear it shifting against the seatbelt I had stretched across it. In the rearview mirror, I watched the front door close. Greg did not wait until I reached the street. He was already inside before I passed the mailbox. 24 years in that house, and he could not be bothered to watch me leave it. I turned left on Belmont Avenue and drove toward the highway. I had no plan. I had no destination. I had $340 in my checking account, a quarter tank of gas, and no one expecting me anywhere. My mother's sister, Aunt Lorraine, lived in Roanoke, 90 minutes southwest. I thought about calling her, but stopped myself. If my mother had left everything to Greg, then the family must have known. Lorraine must have known. Everyone had chosen a side, and it was not mine. That is what I told myself as I merged onto I-64 eastbound toward Richmond, a city where I knew no one and no one knew me. What I did not know, what I would not learn for another 4 years, was that Lorraine had been calling my phone for 3 days straight. Greg answered the first time. He told her I had changed my number. He told her I did not want to be contacted. He told her I was unstable. Lorraine believed him because she had no reason not to. The man had just buried his wife. Who lies during grief? Greg did. Greg lied with the fluency of someone who had been rehearsing for years. The drive to Richmond took an hour and 12 minutes. I remember because I watched the clock on the dashboard the entire way, counting minutes, the way you count steps when you are trying not to fall. The highway was flat and gray. Virginia farmland rolled past on both sides, September green fading to early autumn gold. I kept both hands on the wheel at 10 and 2, because if I loosened my grip even slightly, I was afraid my arms would stop working altogether. The dollhouse sat behind me. I could see it in the mirror when I checked my blind spot. Periwinkle blue, the paint my mother mixed herself from 2 different cans at the hardware store because she could not find the exact shade she wanted pre-made. The tiny glass windows caught the afternoon sun as I drove and threw small, bright squares of light across the headliner of my car. Moving, shifting, dancing, like the house was alive, like it was trying to tell me something. I drove 70 miles south with no destination. The only thing keeping me from pulling over and giving up was the dollhouse in my back seat. I did not know it was keeping something else, too. Richmond did not welcome me. It did not reject me either. It simply did not notice I had arrived. I found the apartment on Craigslist the second night, after sleeping in my car in the parking lot of a Walmart off Broad Street, with the dollhouse buckled into the seat beside me like a silent passenger. The listing said Church Hill, 500 square feet, $875 per month, above commercial space. The commercial space turned out to be a barber shop called King's Chair. The owner, a man named Darnell who wore a gold chain and called everyone young lady, regardless of age, showed me the unit on a Wednesday afternoon. 1 room, a kitchenette with 2 burners, and a refrigerator that hummed at a pitch that would keep me awake for the first 3 weeks. A bathroom the size of a closet. 1 window overlooking East Broad Street, where buses rattled past every 14 minutes, starting at 5:40 a.m. The walls were beige. The carpet was brown. The ceiling had a water stain shaped like a hand. I signed the lease that afternoon and paid first month and security with $1,750, leaving me with $340 minus the $1,750 I had scraped together by selling my textbooks, my winter coat, and the only piece of jewelry I owned besides my mother's earrings, a silver bracelet my college roommate had given me for graduation. After move-in costs, I had $127.43. The pearl studs stayed in my pocket. I would have starved before selling those. I set the dollhouse on the kitchen counter because it was the only surface large enough to hold it. The periwinkle blue looked foreign against the brown laminate and stained backsplash. It did not belong there. Neither did I. But it was the only beautiful thing in that apartment. And some nights, when I could not sleep, and the refrigerator hum felt like it was drilling into the base of my skull, I would sit at the counter with the lights off and trace my fingers along the tiny window frames my mother had cut from real glass. I could feel the care in every joint, the precision of the hinges she installed with a jeweler's screwdriver, the slight unevenness of hand-sanded wood that no machine could replicate. She built this in the evenings after I went to bed. 6 months of work I never saw. I only saw the finished gift on my 5th birthday, wrapped in newspaper because my mother believed wrapping paper was wasteful. I had screamed with joy. She had cried. I did not understand why she was crying then. I understood now. She was giving me the best thing she knew how to make. And 24 years later, it was the only thing of hers I had left. The job search started on day 3 and did not stop for 4 months. I applied for everything: administrative assistant positions, receptionist roles, retail sales at furniture stores where I thought my eye for design might matter. I submitted 47 applications in the first 6 weeks. I kept a spreadsheet on my cracked laptop, the one with a battery that lasted 90 minutes on a full charge. Company name, position, date applied, response. The response column filled with the same word over and over: rejected, rejected, no response, rejected. One design firm in Scott's edition sent a reply that I read 14 times. We appreciate your interest, but are pursuing candidates with more experience. More experience. I had an associate's degree from a community college and a portfolio of classroom projects that no one in the professional world took seriously. My mother always said my eye was special, that I could see potential in broken things. Employers did not care about potential. They cared about credentials, and mine fit on a Post-it note. I found part-time work at a coffee shop on Grace Street called Pour Over, $9.50 an hour, 25 hours a week. The math was merciless. $950 a month before taxes, $875 rent. That left $75 for food, transportation, phone bill, and everything else a person needs to survive. I stopped buying groceries in the traditional sense. Instant ramen became breakfast. Black coffee from the shop, free during shifts, became lunch. Dinner was whatever I could assemble from the discount shelf at the grocery store 3 blocks away. Dented cans of soup, day-old bread marked down to $1.19. Bruised bananas no one else wanted. One night in late October, 5 weeks after arriving, I sat cross-legged on the kitchen floor at 11 p.m. eating ramen from a chipped bowl I had found at a thrift store for 35 cents. The steam curled up past my face and fogged the window of the dollhouse sitting on the counter above me. Through the tiny glass panes, I could see the miniature rooms my mother had painted, the sage-green kitchen, the butter-yellow living room. Small worlds inside a small house owned by a woman who was becoming smaller every day. I set down the bowl and pressed my forehead against the counter edge and stayed there until the ramen went cold. In November, I made the call I had been avoiding. I dialed Greg's number from my phone at 2:15 in the afternoon on a Tuesday, sitting on the bench outside Pour Over during my 15-minute break. My hands were red and cracked from washing espresso pitchers in water that was always too hot. The phone rang 4 times. I heard the click of connection and then silence. "Greg," I said, "it is Bianca. I just wanted to ask about some of Mom's things, her recipe cards and the photo albums from when I was little. If I could just come pick." The line went dead. Not voicemail, not a busy signal. He had answered, listened long enough to confirm it was me, and hung up. I called back. The automated voice informed me that this number was no longer accepting calls from my phone. He blocked me. Not ignored, blocked, like sealing a door with concrete. I tried one more thing. In December, after a particularly bad week where I bounced a check for $23.40 at the grocery store and had to put back the eggs, I looked up estate lawyers in Richmond. I called 3 offices. The first wanted a $5,000 retainer. The second said $3,500 minimum for probate disputes. The third, a solo practitioner who sounded kind, told me he could possibly work with $2,000 up front, but cautioned that contesting a will in Virginia was expensive and slow, and the outcome was never guaranteed. $2,000. I had $61 in my account. I thanked him and hung up and sat in the stairwell above King's Chair Barbershop and listened to Darnell laughing with a client below me and wondered if this was going to be the rest of my life, working for $9. $50 an hour in a city that did not know my name, living above a barbershop, eating ramen at midnight, mourning a mother who apparently loved her second husband more than her only daughter. That was the thought that gutted me, not the poverty, not the loneliness, the belief, the quiet, corrosive belief that grew in the dark like mold, that my mother had looked at her life and decided Greg deserved it more, that I was not enough, that the dollhouse was a consolation prize for the daughter who did not make the cut. I hated myself for thinking it. I hated myself more for not being able to stop. The worst night came in January, a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays were my day off, and days off were dangerous because they gave me nothing to do but think. I was sorting through my coat pockets looking for a forgotten dollar bill when my fingers closed around something small and dry and papery, I pulled it out, a curl of lemon peel, dried and brittle, still faintly yellow. It had been there since September. Since the last Sunday afternoon before my mother died, when she made her lemon pound cake, and I sat at the kitchen island peeling lemons while she measured flour. She had tucked a strip of peel into my jacket pocket as a joke. "For luck," she said. "You always need a little lemon in your pocket." I had laughed. She had smiled. 4 days later, she was dead. I pressed that dried peel to my nose and inhaled. The scent was almost gone, a ghost of citrus, thin as memory. I cried on the kitchen floor for an hour, not quiet tears, the kind that pull sounds from somewhere below your stomach. Sounds that do not resemble anything human. Sounds you are grateful no one else can hear. On a Tuesday in January, 4 months after I arrived in Richmond with nothing, I walked past a shop in Carytown with a hand-lettered sign in the window, "Help Wanted. Must be willing to get sawdust in your hair." The sign was hand-lettered in white paint on a piece of reclaimed barnwood, the kind of sign someone with steady hands and a respect for materials would make. I stood on the sidewalk in Carytown staring at it for a full minute before I pushed open the door. A bell chimed overhead, brass, tarnished, the real thing. The smell hit me before my eyes adjusted to the dim interior. Wood stain and linseed oil and fresh sawdust, and underneath it all, coffee. Good coffee, not the burnt commercial roast I had been pouring at pour-over for 4 months, but something dark and rich, with a hint of chicory that reminded me of something I could not place. Moreau's Restorations occupied a narrow storefront between a vintage clothing boutique and a used bookshop. Every inch of the space was filled. Chairs hung from ceiling hooks in various states of repair. Dressers lined the walls with their drawers removed and stacked beside them like puzzle pieces waiting to be reassembled. A workbench ran the length of the back wall, covered in clamps and chisels, and jars of hand-mixed stain organized by shade, from honey to mahogany. It was cluttered and warm and alive. It felt like walking into someone's mind. A woman emerged from behind a tall armoire she was stripping with a heat gun. She was in her early 60s, lean and angular, with close-cropped gray hair and reading glasses pushed up onto her forehead. Her hands were the first thing I noticed. Calloused, scarred across the knuckles, stained with lacquer around the nail beds. Working hands, the kind that had built and repaired and created for decades. She wore a canvas apron over a flannel shirt and jeans spotted with polyurethane. A pencil sat behind her left ear. "Can I help you?" Her voice carried a trace of an accent. Haitian, I would learn later, tempered by 40 years in Virginia but never erased. I pointed at the sign in the window. "You are hiring?" She looked me up and down, not unkindly, appraisingly. The way you evaluate a piece of furniture before deciding if it is worth the effort. "What do you know about restoration?" "My mother used to fix things," I said. "Furniture mostly. She taught me how to sand, how to match grain, how to glue a joint so it holds." The woman raised one eyebrow. She disappeared behind the armoire and returned carrying something. A chair leg, oak, maybe 60 years old, split lengthwise down the center, with the grain separation running about 9 inches. One end was splintered where it had broken away from the seat. She set it on the workbench in front of me. "Fix it." No interview questions, no "tell me about yourself," no "where do you see yourself in 5 years?" Just a broken piece of wood and 2 words. I stared at the leg for a moment. Then I picked it up and turned it in my hands, feeling the weight, reading the grain the way my mother taught me. The split followed the wood's natural lines, which meant it could be repaired rather than replaced if I aligned the fibers correctly. I found a bottle of wood glue on the bench, applied a thin bead along both faces of the split, pressed them together, and reached for a bar clamp. I tightened it slowly, watching the glue squeeze out evenly along the seam, then wiped the excess with a damp rag before it could set. The splintered end needed more work. I selected a chisel from the wall rack, pared the damaged fibers back to clean wood, and shaped a small wedge from a scrap piece of matching oak I found in a bin beneath the bench. I tapped it into place with a mallet, trimmed the overhang with a flush-cut saw, and ran my thumb along the repair. Smooth, tight, invisible once sanded and stained. The whole process took 11 minutes. I did not think about it while I was doing it. My hands remembered what my mind had tried to forget. The sound of my mother's voice in the garage on Saturday mornings, patient and precise. Feel the grain, Bianca. The wood will tell you what it needs. You just have to listen. I set the repaired leg on the bench and looked up. The woman was leaning against the armoire, arms folded, watching me with an expression I could not read. Where did you learn to select a matching wedge like that? My mom kept a scrap bin sorted by species. She said you should never patch oak with pine. It is disrespectful to the original builder. A pause. Something flickered across the woman's face. Recognition, maybe, or the particular sadness of someone who understands loss through craft. I am Claudette Moreau, she said. I own this shop. Bianca Ruby. $14 an hour, she said, Tuesday through Saturday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. You get a 30-minute lunch and all the coffee you can drink. She nodded toward a French press on a shelf beside the cash register. I roast it myself, Haitian blend. I wanted to say something articulate. My voice cracked on the second syllable, and I turned away and pretended to examine a drawer pull on the nearest dresser until I could trust my face again. I started the following Tuesday, January 14th, 2020. The first morning, Claudette handed me a broom and pointed at the workshop floor. Before you create, you clean. I swept. I organized. I labeled jars of hardware, sorted screws by size, arranged sandpaper by grit from 60 to 2,000. It was tedious work. It was also the first time in 4 months that someone expected something specific from me and trusted me to deliver it. That small act of trust felt like water after a drought. Over the next weeks, Claudette taught me, not through lectures or manuals, but through proximity. She would start a project, and I would watch. Then she would step back and let me continue. She corrected me sparingly and praised me even less. But when I learned to strip lacquer with chemical solvents and heat guns, reading the finish to determine which method would preserve the wood beneath. I learned to rebuild mortise and tenon joints using hand-cut wooden pegs instead of metal fasteners, because Claudette believed in honoring the original construction method. I learned to identify wood species by smell. Cherry has a faint sweetness. Walnut carries a bitter edge. White oak smells like vinegar when freshly cut. These details entered my body the way music enters a musician, not through memorization, but through repetition until it becomes instinct. She was laughing at something outside the frame, her head tilted back, caught mid-joy. The nameplate on the frame read, Sylvie Moreau, 1989 to 2008. I never asked about the photo. Claudette told me on her own terms, 3 months in, while we were refinishing a cherry dining table that a client had dragged behind a moving truck for 6 blocks before realizing it was still tied to the bumper. The surface was gouged and scraped, the finish destroyed. Claudette ran her hand across the damage and said she was 19. Leukemia. I watched her for 5 years. I watched her disappear 1 pound at a time. After she died, I did not leave this shop for 3 months. I slept on that couch. She pointed to a battered leather sofa against the far wall. I repaired every broken thing people brought me because I could not repair the one thing that mattered. I did not say I am sorry because I understood by then that those words, no matter how sincere, cannot touch the kind of loss Claudette carried. Instead, I picked up a chisel and started working on the table beside her. We finished it in silence. That silence was its own kind of conversation. Claudette fed me every Friday, Haitian rice and beans cooked on a single-burner hot plate she kept in the back room. She never asked if I was hungry. She just set a plate in front of me at noon and said, "Eat." The rice was seasoned with garlic and thyme and something smoky I could never identify. The beans were slow-cooked with peppers and a bay leaf. I had not eaten a meal that someone else prepared for me since my mother died. The first time Claudette placed that plate on the workbench between us, I picked up the fork and took one bite and had to turn toward the window because my eyes filled so fast I could not blink it away. Claudette said nothing. She just ate her own plate and let me have the moment without commentary. 3 months into the job, I was sanding a rocking chair when Claudette came up behind me and inspected my work. She ran her fingers along the arm I had reshaped, feeling for imperfections. Then she said a word I had not heard directed at me since my mother died. Talented. Just the one word, dropped into the sawdust-filled air like a seed. I set down the sandpaper and walked to the bathroom and closed the door and pressed my back against it and cried for 10 minutes. Not grief this time, something else. The ache of being recognized after believing you were invisible. Claudette said something to me one Friday over rice and beans that I wrote on a Post-it and stuck to my bathroom mirror. I read it every morning for 3 years. The things people throw away tell you more about them than the things they keep. I did not understand what she meant. Not yet. If you have ever been told you were not worth keeping, if someone threw you away and you had to rebuild yourself from nothing, type "I rebuilt" in the comments. And if this story is resonating with you, hit that like button. I promise what happens next is worth staying for. 2 years passed in sawdust and silence. Not the heavy silence of grief, though that still lived in me, but the quieter kind. The silence of someone learning to inhabit her own life again. I worked at Moreau's Restoration 6 days a week, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., sometimes later when a project demanded it. Claudette gave me a raise after 6 months, $16 an hour. Another after a year, $18. Not because I asked, but because she noticed the clients were beginning to request me by name. The first piece I restored on my own was a walnut secretary desk from the 1940s. A woman in the Fan District had inherited it from her grandmother, and a moving company had cracked the writing surface clean in half. She brought it to the shop in tears. Claudette looked at the damage, looked at me, and said, "This one is yours." I spent 3 weeks on that desk. I glued the crack, reinforced it from beneath with a butterfly joint I carved from matching walnut, stripped the old varnish down to bare wood, and rebuilt the finish with 6 coats of hand-rubbed tung oil. When the client came to pick it up, she ran her fingers across the repair line and could not find it. She looked at me like I had performed something miraculous. I had not. I had just listened to the wood, the way my mother taught me. By the spring of 2021, I had 11 regular clients of my own. People who found me through word of mouth, through Claudette's referrals, through a small Instagram account I started posting my before and after photos on. Nothing flashy, just the work. A cracked table leg made whole. A water-damaged dresser brought back to life. Broken things restored to what they were meant to be. I was earning $2,400 a month between my hourly wage and my private jobs. Still modest, still careful, but the $875 rent no longer felt like a knife at my throat. I could buy groceries without calculating each item to the penny. I could replace my cracked phone screen. I even bought a new pair of work boots from a real store instead of Goodwill. They cost $67, and I wore them every day for the next 2 years. I met James on a Saturday afternoon in April 2021. He walked into Moreau's carrying a wooden stool with a split seat and an apologetic expression. "I sat on it wrong," he said, which is apparently a thing you can do. I looked at the stool. The seat had separated along the grain right down the center. A clean break, easy repair. I looked at him. Tall, brown eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, a messenger bag slung across his chest, stuffed with what I later learned were AP history essays he graded at coffee shops because his apartment was too quiet. His shirt had a coffee stain on the pocket. His shoes were scuffed. He looked like someone who paid more attention to the world around him than to himself. "I can have this back to you by Thursday," I said. He smiled. "That would save me from standing at my kitchen counter for every meal this week." He came back on Thursday. He stayed for 40 minutes, asking about the shop, about the armoire Claudette was stripping, about the difference between shellac and lacquer. He asked questions the way curious people do, not to fill silence, but because the answers interested him. When he left, he paused at the door and turned around. "Do you like tacos?" The question caught me off guard. I heard Claudette stifle something behind the armoire that might have been a laugh. "There's a stand on Carey Street," he continued. "El Patron. They make this green salsa that I am fairly sure is a controlled substance. Would you want to go sometime?" I said yes before my brain caught up to my mouth. It was the first time in 2 years I had said yes to anything that was not work. Our first date was on a Wednesday evening. El Patron was a food truck parked permanently on a side street with 4 picnic tables and string lights overhead. James ordered chicken tacos, and I ordered carnitas, and we sat across from each other on a bench that wobbled every time one of us shifted weight. He told me about teaching 11th grade history at a public school in Henrico County, about the student who wrote an entire essay on World War II using only information from a video game, about the parent who emailed him at midnight asking if the Civil War could be taught from both sides. He made me laugh, describing his attempts to cook Thanksgiving dinner for himself last year, which ended with a smoke alarm, a burnt turkey, and a pizza delivery at 9 p.m. Then he reached for the green salsa without looking and knocked the container sideways. A bright arc of green splattered across his white shirt, his forearm, and the edge of the table. He looked down at the damage and then up at me with an expression of such genuine dismay that I laughed. Not a polite laugh. Not the careful, measured sounds I had been producing for 2 years when social situations required it. A real laugh from somewhere below my ribs, loud enough that the couple at the next table turned to look. James stared at me with salsa dripping from his elbow and started laughing too. We sat there on that wobbling bench under string lights with green salsa on the table between us, and I realized I had forgotten what this felt like. Joy without conditions. Warmth that did not require performance. A person who was exactly who he appeared to be. We dated slowly. I insisted on it. I told James early, maybe the 3rd date, that I had lost my mother 2 years ago and that the aftermath had been bad. He set down his fork and looked at me and said, "Tell me." So I did. Not everything, not yet, but enough. My mother dying, Greg claiming the estate, being told to leave, the $340 and the Honda Civic and the dollhouse in the back seat, the months of ramen and rejection emails and sleeping above a barber shop in Church Hill. James did not try to fix it. He did not offer solutions or silver linings or the suggestion that maybe it was all part of a plan. He just listened. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that no one had said to me since my mother died. That must have been so lonely. Not, "What a shame," or "How terrible," or "Your stepfather sounds like a bad person." Just the observation that I had been alone in all of it. The simplest truth, spoken without decoration. I almost cried in the restaurant. I bit the inside of my cheek hard enough to taste copper and nodded and changed the subject. But I remembered the sentence. I carried it with me the way I carried my mother's pearl earrings. Proof that someone had seen me. By the fall of 2021, James had become part of the rhythm of my life. Dinner on Wednesdays, coffee on Saturday mornings at Elwood Thompson's in Carytown, Sunday walks along the canal. He met Claudette, who approved of him by offering seconds of her rice and beans without being asked. He saw the dollhouse on my kitchen counter and studied it for a long time, running his fingers over the tiny hinges, the miniature glass windows. "Your mom built this?" "Every piece of it." He shook his head slowly. "This is museum quality, Bianca. It is the best thing anyone ever gave me," I said. He looked at me, and I could see him cataloging what I had just revealed. Not about the dollhouse, about me. About what it meant that the best thing I owned was something made by the hands of a woman I had lost. Then, on a Tuesday evening in October 2021, 2 years and 1 month after I arrived in Richmond with nothing, I received a Facebook message from a woman I had not heard from since my mother's funeral. The name on the screen was Lorraine Pryor, my mother's older sister. The message was 3 lines long. I read it 17 times. Bianca, I have been trying to find you for 2 years. Greg told me you disappeared. Please call me. There are things you need to know about your mother. I sat on my apartment floor with my back against the kitchen cabinet and stared at those words. 2 years. Lorraine had been looking for me for 2 years. Greg told her I disappeared. The same Greg who blocked my number. The same Greg who told me my mother chose him. What else had he told people? What else had he lied about? I looked up at the dollhouse on the counter above me. The periwinkle paint caught the overhead light. The tiny glass windows reflected my face back at me, fractured into small, bright squares. I typed a response with shaking fingers. Aunt Lorraine, I am here. I never disappeared. I never changed my number. I would like to call you. When is a good time? Her reply came in 11 seconds. Now. Call me right now. I did, and Aunt Lorraine told me 3 things on that phone call. The first made me sit down. The second made me cry. The third made me drive to my apartment and stare at the dollhouse on my kitchen counter for a very long time. The first thing Lorraine told me was that my mother's marriage had been falling apart for over a year before she died. I did not know this. I lived in that house until the day I left for community college, and I never saw them argue. But Lorraine said that was the point. Your mother protected you from everything, she said. Her voice carried the particular weight of a woman who had been holding a secret for too long and could finally set it down. She did not want you to see what Greg was becoming. Lorraine told me it started with money. Greg had always earned less than my mother. His salary as a claims adjuster at a regional insurance company was $54,000 a year. My mother's administrative position at UVA paid $48,000, but she had the house free and clear, no mortgage, and investment accounts she had built carefully over 18 years. She kept her finances separate. Her name on the deed, her name on the fidelity account. Greg resented this. He called it a lack of trust. She called it common sense. By 2018, he was pushing her to add his name to the house title. She refused. He pressured her to merge their bank accounts. She refused again. He suggested they take out a home equity line of credit against the property to fund renovations he wanted. She said no. The house was paid off, and she intended to keep it that way. Your mother told me something that February, Lorraine continued. She said Greg had changed, that he used to be patient, and now he was just waiting. I asked her what that meant, and she said, waiting for me to die so he can have what he married me for. I gripped the phone so hard the case creaked. She said that? Her exact words, February 2019, 7 months before she died. The second thing Lorraine told me was that in March of 2019, my mother drove to an attorney's office on East Main Street in Charlottesville, alone, without telling Greg. She consulted a lawyer named David Ashworth about 2 things. The first was a divorce. The second, Lorraine did not know the specifics. Your mother said she had made arrangements to protect you, Lorraine told me. Those were her words. I have made arrangements to protect Bianca. She would not tell me more. She said it was safer if fewer people knew. I asked her safer from what, and she just said, from Greg. Arrangements. The word circled in my head like a bird looking for a place to land. My mother had consulted a divorce attorney 6 months before. A blood clot traveled from her leg to her lung and killed her on a Sunday morning. She had made arrangements to protect me. But the will Greg showed me left everything to him. The arrangements, whatever they were, had either failed or never existed. Unless they existed somewhere I had not looked. Then Lorraine told me the third thing, and it was the one that rearranged every assumption I had carried for 2 years. Bianca, do you know what Greg has been saying about you? My stomach tightened. Saying to whom? To everyone. Lorraine's voice shifted, harder now, edged with the kind of anger that has been composting for months. He told your cousin Deborah you were on drugs. He told the neighbors you refused help. He told the women at church that he offered you money and you threw it back in his face. He has been hosting a memorial garden party for your mother every September, and he stands in her garden and tells 40 people that he lost his wife and then lost his stepdaughter to addiction. The room tilted. I pressed my palm flat against the kitchen floor to steady myself. I am not on drugs. I know that, sweetheart. Lorraine's voice cracked. I know that. But I believed him when he said you changed your number. I believed him when he said you did not want contact. I spent 2 years thinking you had shut me out, and the entire time, he was the one keeping us apart. I closed my eyes. The apartment hummed around me. The refrigerator, a bus on East Broad rattling the window. Darnell's radio playing Motown 2 floors below me through the thin floorboards. I had spent 2 years believing I was alone because my mother chose Greg over me. The truth was, Greg had built a wall around my life and convinced everyone on both sides that the other side did not want to talk. Lorraine, how did you find me? A friend of your mother's from UVA, Janet Colson. She saw one of your furniture posts on Instagram. She recognized your last name and your face. She messaged me last week and asked if you were Jolene's daughter, Janet Colson. I did not know the name. But somewhere in the English department at UVA, a woman my mother worked with for 18 years had been scrolling through Instagram and recognized the daughter of a dead colleague in a photo of a restored walnut desk. The world is smaller than grief makes it feel. Lorraine sent me the screenshots that night. I sat on my bed with my phone propped against a pillow and scrolled through them one by one. The first was a Facebook post from September 2020. Greg standing in my mother's garden, white roses behind him, wearing a pressed shirt and his Cartier Santos watch. The caption read, "Missing my beautiful wife today. Grateful she trusted me to carry on her legacy. Her garden has never looked better." 147 likes, 32 comments, all sympathy, all believing every word. The second screenshot was from Christmas 2020, a photo of the living room I grew up in. The tree was decorated with my mother's ornaments, the crystal snowflakes she collected, 1 per year. On the couch sat Becca, smiling, holding a glass of wine, wearing my mother's pearl necklace. Not the studs I had taken, the necklace, the double strand with the gold clasp that my mother wore to every formal event for 20 years. Becca's caption was simply, "Home for the holidays," with a red heart emoji. I stared at my mother's pearls around a stranger's neck and felt something cold settle beneath my ribs. The third screenshot was a private message, Greg to my mother's cousin Deborah, dated February 2020. The text read, "Bianca is in bad shape. Drugs, I think. I tried to help, but she will not let me. I have to focus on keeping Jolene's memory alive. Some people cannot be saved." 5 months after he kicked me out of my own home with $340 and a dollhouse, he was telling my family I was a drug addict. He was not just stealing my inheritance. He was stealing my identity, rewriting who I was in the minds of everyone who might have helped me, every aunt, every cousin, every neighbor who might have picked up the phone and called. He had reached them first with a version of me that did not exist. I scrolled through 17 more screenshots. Greg at church, Greg at a neighborhood fundraiser, Greg accepting condolences at a brunch at Feast Restaurant in Charlottesville, where the tab for his table of 8 came to $740, and he paid with a card I was certain was linked to my mother's accounts. In every photo, he wore grief like a tailored suit, fitted, flattering, designed to impress. And in the background of every photo, my mother's house, my mother's garden, my mother's things, absorbed into his life as though she had never existed as a separate person with a daughter who loved her. I set the phone face down on the mattress. My apartment was dark. The only light came from the street lamp outside and the faint glow of the dollhouse on the kitchen counter where it had sat for 2 years, quiet, patient, waiting for something I could not name. Lorraine said one more thing before she hung up. "Your mother loved that dollhouse, Bianca. She spent months building it. She told me once that she put her whole heart inside it. I thought she meant it metaphorically. She did not. I did not open the dollhouse that night. I was not ready. Lorraine's words sat in me like stones dropped into deep water, sinking slowly, displacing everything they touched. I went to bed at 1 a.m. and lay beside James in the dark, listening to him breathe, and thought about my mother consulting a divorce attorney 6 months before she died. About arrangements she made to protect me. About Greg telling 40 people at a garden party that I was a drug addict while I was 3 hours south restoring furniture for $14 an hour and eating ramen for dinner. I did not sleep. At 4 a.m., I got up and sat at the kitchen counter and looked at the dollhouse and tried to understand what Lorraine meant. She put her whole heart inside it. Metaphor. It had to be metaphor. My mother was sentimental. She spoke in poetry when she wanted to say something that mattered. The dollhouse was a symbol of her love for me. That was all. That was enough. I made coffee and went to work and did not think about it again. Not that day, not that week, not for another 3 years. Life moved forward. James and I got married on a Saturday afternoon in October 2022 at the Carytown Community Garden. 14 people, no aisle, no veil. Claudette brought a cake she baked herself, lopsided and perfect. Lorraine drove up from Roanoke and sat in the front row and cried through the entire 12-minute ceremony. I wore my mother's pearl studs. James wore the only tie he owned, navy blue, slightly wrinkled. We wrote our own vows, and mine were 4 sentences long because I have never been good with words spoken aloud. The words I am good with are the ones my hands know: wood and glue and the patience to make broken things whole. Our daughter Noah was born the following August 19th, 2023. 6 pounds, 11 ounces, dark hair, her father's brown eyes, my mother's chin. When the nurse placed her on my chest, I felt something I had not felt since I was 5 years old, opening a periwinkle blue dollhouse on my birthday. The sensation of receiving something so precious that holding it makes your hands tremble because you understand that this is the thing that matters. I looked at James standing beside the bed with tears running into his collar, and I thought, my mother would have loved this. She would have loved every second of it. And Greg had stolen that from us, from all 3 of us. We moved into a small house on a quiet street in Churchill. 2 bedrooms, a yard the size of a postage stamp, a kitchen where James burned toast every Saturday morning with such consistency that I stopped buying a toaster and started buying a fire extinguisher. I opened Second Story Designs as a registered business, working from a rented studio space 3 blocks from Claudette's shop. Restoration projects and small interior design jobs. Revenue was modest, about $78,000 in my first full year, but it was mine. Every dollar earned with my own hands. The dollhouse traveled with us. It sat on the bookshelf in Noah's nursery. She was fascinated by it from the moment she could focus her eyes on objects. By the time she was 2, she would stand on her tiptoes and press her face against the tiny glass windows and announce the colors of each room. Green kitchen, yellow room, blue bedroom. She called it Grandma's house. I never taught her that phrase. James did not either. She invented it on her own, as though some knowledge passes through blood without requiring words. Noah's 3rd birthday was approaching, August 19th, 2024. I wanted to give her the dollhouse properly, not sitting on a shelf where she could look but not touch. Restored, cleaned, repaired, ready for a child's hands, the way it had once been ready for mine. I brought it to the kitchen table on a Sunday morning in late July and began assessing the damage. 5 years in a Honda Civic back seat, 3 apartments, 1 move across town, and the general entropy of a handmade object that had existed for 24 years had taken their toll. The periwinkle paint was chipped along the base. One of the porch columns had snapped off, and I had kept the broken piece in an envelope taped to the back wall. 2 of the tiny glass windows had cracked. The front door hinge was bent, and the attic room, the highest point of the dollhouse, had a panel that was pulling away from the frame. I started with the paint. I mixed a custom batch to match the original shade my mother had blended from 2 cans at the hardware store in 2000. I touched up the chips and smoothed the edges with 400 grit sandpaper. I re-glued the porch column and replaced the cracked windows with new glass cut from a picture frame I found at a thrift store for $2. I straightened the front door hinge with a pair of needle-nose pliers. Each repair took patience. Each one felt like a conversation with my mother. Her hands had shaped this wood. My hands were healing it. Then I reached the attic. The loose panel sat at the back of the miniature room, a rectangle of thin plywood about 4 inches by 3 inches that formed the ceiling of the attic and the underside of the roof. It was pulling away from the frame on one side. A simple fix, re-glue and clamp. I reached in with a small flathead screwdriver to pry the panel gently away from the frame so I could apply fresh adhesive along the seam. The panel resisted, then released with a soft pop. And behind it was a space I did not expect. A cavity, deliberately constructed. The panel was not a ceiling panel at all. It was a false floor built into the attic room with a tiny brass hinge on one side, almost invisible against the wood, the kind of hinge you would use on a jewelry box. My mother had built a hidden compartment inside the dollhouse, concealed behind a panel that looked structural but was actually a door. Noah was sitting on the kitchen floor 3 feet away, stacking wooden blocks into a tower. James was in the next room grading papers. The house smelled like the coffee he had burned and the wood glue I was using, and the lavender from the garden box outside the window. Sunday morning, ordinary, unremarkable, except that my hands had stopped moving and my heart was beating so loud I could feel it in my wrists. I opened the hidden panel the rest of the way. Inside, taped to the underside of the miniature roof with 2 strips of clear packing tape that had yellowed with age, was an envelope. Cream-colored linen, the same stationery my mother used for important correspondence. Her handwriting on the front in blue ballpoint pen. For my Bianca, when you find this. I pulled the envelope free, the tape released with a whisper. The paper was cool against my fingertips and heavier than it should have been. Something was folded inside, multiple pages. I turned it over. The flap was sealed with a small circle of wax. Not decorative, functional. The kind of seal you use when you want to know if someone has opened something before you. The wax was unbroken. No one had touched this envelope since my mother sealed it. My hands were trembling so badly I had to set down the screwdriver. It clattered against the table. James looked up from the doorway. "You okay?" I could not answer. I broke the seal. The wax crumbled into small ochre flakes on the table surface. Inside were 3 items. The first was a 2-page handwritten letter on matching cream linen stationery. My mother's handwriting, steady, deliberate, not the script of a woman who was confused or coerced. The second was a legal document. Dense text, notary seal at the bottom, red ink, Commonwealth of Virginia, dated March 3rd, 2019. The header read, Last Will and Testament of Jolene Marie Ruby. The third was a business card, David Ashworth, attorney at law, East Main Street, Charlottesville, Virginia. A phone number printed in small type beneath the address. I read the letter first. My mother's voice filled the room as though she were sitting beside me at this table, 5 years late, but exactly on time. My dearest Bianca, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and Greg has done what I always feared he would do. I am sorry. I am sorry I did not leave him sooner. I am sorry I did not tell you what was happening. I thought I could manage him. I thought I had more time. I was wrong about the time, but I was not wrong about you. You were never the problem, baby girl. You were the only thing in this house worth protecting. I have made a new will, the real one. It is enclosed. Everything I own, the house, the accounts, the life insurance, it all belongs to you. Greg gets nothing. I have given a copy to my attorney, David Ashworth. His office is on East Main Street in Charlottesville. He has copies of everything. Greg cannot touch what he does not know exists, and he does not know about the attic. Take this to David. He will know what to do. And Bianca, please know that I loved you from the first moment I held you, and I never stopped, not for 1 second, not even now, especially now. Mom. I read it 3 times. The first time, the words blurred because I could not see through the water in my eyes. The second time, I pressed the paper against my chest and rocked forward and made a sound I did not recognize. The third time I read it out loud so she could hear her own words in the room where her granddaughter was playing. Noah looked up from her blocks. Mama crying? I wiped my face and smiled at her. Happy tears, baby. These are happy tears. She considered this information, decided it was acceptable, and returned to her tower. James was in the doorway now. He had heard everything. His face was pale. His jaw was working the way it did when he was trying not to react until he understood. I held up the legal document with the red notary seal. The will Greg showed me was fake, I said. My voice sounded like it belonged to someone who had just surfaced from deep water. This is the real one. She left everything to me. She hid it in the dollhouse because she knew he would look everywhere else. I picked up my phone and called the number my mother had written at the bottom of the page. It rang 3 times. A man's voice answered, calm, measured, professional. Ashworth Law Office, this is David. Mr. Ashworth, my name is Bianca Ruby. I think my mother told you I would call. A pause. 2 seconds. 3. Then his voice changed, shifted from professional to something warmer, something that sounded like relief. She did, he said. I have been waiting for 5 years. David Ashworth's office sat on the 2nd floor of a converted brick row house on East Main Street in downtown Charlottesville. I drove the 70 miles from Richmond on a Wednesday morning, leaving Noah with James, who had taken a personal day, without me having to ask. He saw my face when I hung up the phone the night before and simply said, I will cancel tomorrow. Tell me what you need. What I needed was to sit in my car in a parking garage 2 blocks from Ashworth's office for 10 minutes before I could make my legs carry me inside. I gripped the steering wheel with both hands and stared at the concrete wall in front of me and whispered the words my mother had written. You were never the problem, baby girl. You were the only thing in this house worth protecting. I said it 3 times. Once for the girl who had been kicked out with $340. Once for the woman who had rebuilt herself from sawdust and instant ramen. And once for the mother I was now, who needed to be steady for a daughter who called a periwinkle dollhouse Grandma's house without ever meeting the woman who built it. Then I picked up the envelope, got out of the car, and walked 2 blocks east on Main Street, past the coffee shop where students from UVA hunched over laptops, and the bookstore with the orange cat in the window. The air smelled like autumn approaching. Warm pavement and the first dry leaves. And somewhere nearby, someone was roasting coffee beans. I climbed the narrow stairs to the 2nd floor and pushed open a frosted glass door with gold lettering that read, Ashworth Law, established 1997. The reception area was small and warm. Hardwood floors, 2 leather chairs, a side table with a lamp, and a neatly fanned arrangement of Virginia Lawyer magazines. A woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a beaded chain looked up from behind the desk. You must be Bianca. He is expecting you. She said it the way someone says, welcome home after a long absence, not with surprise, but with recognition, as though my arrival was not a question of if, but when. David Ashworth rose from behind his desk when I entered. He was younger than I expected. Late 40s, maybe early 50s, with close-cropped salt and pepper hair, a calm face, and the kind of eyes that looked like they had spent decades reading between lines. His office smelled like leather and old paper. Legal volumes lined the shelves. A window behind his desk overlooked Main Street, where I had just walked. His handshake was firm but gentle, the grip of a man who understood that the person across from him was holding herself together with effort. Please sit down, Bianca. He gestured to a chair across from his desk. Can I get you anything? Water? Coffee? I shook my head. I set the cream linen envelope on his desk between us. He looked at it, looked at the broken wax seal, looked at me. "She told me you would bring that," he said quietly. "She said it might take years. She said you would need to find it on your own." He reached behind him and opened a wall safe I had not noticed, recessed into the bookshelf and concealed behind a row of identical brown volumes. From inside, he withdrew a leather portfolio, thick, secured with an elastic band. The label on the front was handwritten in black ink. Ruby, Jolene, protected. He set it on the desk and opened it. Inside was a duplicate of everything in my envelope. The handwritten will, cream linen stationery, blue ink, notarized with the red seal of the Commonwealth of Virginia. A copy of the 2-page letter. And beneath those, a stack of documents I had never seen. Consultation notes dated March 3, 2019, financial summaries from Fidelity Investments, a photocopy of my mother's driver's license. A signed declaration of testamentary intent, witnessed by Ashworth and his paralegal, Karen Teal. "Your mother came to see me on March 3, 2019, Ashworth began. She arrived without an appointment. She paid the consultation fee in cash, $450. She told me she did not want any record of the visit that her husband could trace. No check, no credit card receipt, no calendar entry." He folded his hands on the desk. "She sat in the same chair you are sitting in right now, and she told me 2 things. The first was that she wanted a divorce. The second was that she needed a new will, one her husband could never find." My throat tightened. I nodded for him to continue. She was specific about the terms. Ashworth opened the will and turned it toward me, pointing to the relevant passages. The entirety of her estate, the house at 1847 Belmont Avenue, valued at the time at $1.1 million, her Fidelity investment accounts totaling approximately $540,000, and a life insurance policy through UVA worth $200,000, all of it goes to you. Sole beneficiary, Bianca Ruby. No provisions for Greg Lassiter. No provisions for Rebecca Lassiter. The will explicitly states that the exclusion of Greg is intentional and not an oversight. I stared at the numbers. $1.1 million, $540,000, $200,000. My mother's entire life reduced to figures on a page. And every dollar of it was supposed to be mine. Every dollar of it had been stolen by a man who married her for exactly this purpose and waited for her to die. She asked me to hold the original in my safe, Ashworth continued. She created the handwritten copy herself, here in this office, on her own stationery. She signed both. I notarized both. Karen witnessed both. Under Virginia Code Section 64, 2-404, a holographic will, one written entirely in the testator's handwriting, is valid without witnesses, provided it can be authenticated. But your mother went further. She wanted witnesses. She wanted the notary seal. She wanted it to be unassailable. "Why did she hide the copy in the dollhouse?" I asked. Ashworth paused. He removed his glasses and cleaned them with a cloth from his desk drawer, a gesture I realized that gave him time to choose his words. "Because she knew Greg would search the house," he said. "She told me he had been going through her papers for months. Her desk, her filing cabinet, her bedside drawer. She needed somewhere he would never think to look, somewhere he considered worthless." He looked at me. "She said the dollhouse was the safest place in the world because Greg hated it. He wanted it thrown away. He would never open it. The precision of it hit me like a wave. My mother had not hidden the will randomly. She had weaponized Greg's contempt. The thing he dismissed as junk, the thing he ordered me to throw in the dumpster, was the thing she chose as her vault. Because she understood him. She understood that a man who sees no value in handmade things would never think to look inside one." Ashworth continued. "After your mother's death, I attempted to contact you. I called the number she had on file. A man answered. He told me you had left the state and did not wish to be contacted. He identified himself as Greg Lassiter. Greg answered my mother's attorney's call and told him I was gone. I did not have grounds to override his statement without evidence that you were being prevented from receiving communication, Ashworth said. But I did not close the file. I kept the documents in my safe, and I monitored the estate. Monitored how? Your mother's Fidelity account ending in 4471. I have a professional relationship with the institution. I placed a flag on the account as the attorney of record for the original will. He pulled a spreadsheet from the portfolio and laid it flat. Between October 2019 and March 2020, Greg Lassiter transferred $214,000 from this account to a personal Chase checking account in his name only. The transfers ranged from $8,500 to $12,000 per month. I looked at the column of numbers, dates on the left, amounts in the center, a running total on the right that climbed like a fever chart. Additionally, approximately $47,000 was withdrawn in cash from ATMs and bank branches over the same period. No electronic trail for those. He tapped the bottom of the spreadsheet. Total documented misappropriation, $261,000. $261,000. My mother's savings. Her years of careful financial planning. Her separate accounts that she maintained specifically because she did not trust the man she married. He drained them within 6 months of her death. I sat there for a long time looking at that number. Ashworth waited. He was the kind of man who understood that silence is not emptiness. It is the space where people decide what they are going to do. Is the will enforceable? I asked. It is. His voice carried certainty. The holographic original is valid under Virginia law. The notarized duplicate in my safe provides additional authentication. I have the witnesses, I have the testamentary declaration, and I have 5 years of financial records showing what Greg did with assets that were never legally his. What about the will he showed me, the one he claimed my mother wrote? We will need a forensic document examiner to confirm, but based on what you have described, a laser-printed document with no notary seal and no witnesses, it will not survive scrutiny. Ashworth's jaw tightened by a degree. Your mother's signature on that document was likely traced. I would start with her driver's license renewal form. The DMV signature is public record. It would have been the easiest source for a forgery. I thought about the HP LaserJet humming at 11:07 p.m. on the night of my mother's funeral. Greg scanning, Greg printing, Greg building a lie while I cried in the next room. Ashworth leaned back in his chair. His eyes held something that was not quite anger. It was closer to the expression Claudette wore when she examined a piece of furniture that had been damaged by neglect. The sadness of seeing something valuable treated carelessly. There is one more thing, Bianca. The printer in that house. We can recover its memory. The printer's memory. I had not considered it, but Ashworth had. He explained it on the drive back to Richmond, a phone call I took from the parking garage where I had sat whispering my mother's words 90 minutes earlier. Modern laser printers store a log of every action, he said. Scans, prints, copies. Each entry is time-stamped, and many retain the thumbnail image of the document. If that printer is still in the house, and it likely is because Greg Lassiter does not strike me as a man who upgrades equipment he considers functional, we can recover the data. The HP LaserJet Pro M404. I remembered the model because I had loaded paper into it for years. It sat on the desk in Greg's study, the room that used to be my mother's reading nook, before Greg converted it into his personal office 2 months after the wedding. Cream walls replaced with dark gray. Her bookshelves emptied of novels and filled with insurance manuals. Her reading lamp swapped for a desk lamp with a fluorescent bulb that hummed at a frequency I could hear from the hallway. I remembered all of it. And I remembered the sound of that printer at 11:07 p.m. on the night my mother was buried. Ashworth filed the initial motion with Charlottesville Circuit Court the following Monday. Case number 2024-PR-0914, a petition to authenticate a holographic will under Virginia Code Section 64. 2-404 and to void the previously submitted testamentary document on grounds of fraud. The filing was sealed, meaning Greg would not receive notification until the court scheduled a hearing. We had time, not unlimited, but enough. The forensic document examination took 11 days. Ashworth retained a specialist named Dr. Catherine Voss from a firm in Alexandria that handled questioned document cases for federal agencies and private litigation. I never met her. I only saw her report, which arrived as a 14-page PDF in my email on a Tuesday afternoon while I was sanding a cabinet door at my studio. I set down the sandpaper and read it on my phone with sawdust still on my fingers. The report was clinical, in the way that science is clinical when it has no reason to be kind. Dr. Voss compared the signature on Greg's document with 11 known exemplars of my mother's handwriting, including checks, tax returns, her UVA employment contract, and her Virginia driver's license renewal form dated January 2019. Her findings occupied 3 paragraphs that dismantled Greg's forgery with surgical precision. The questioned signature exhibits inconsistent pen pressure throughout the letter forms, particularly in the uppercase J of Jolene, where the initial stroke shows hesitation marks consistent with guided rather than spontaneous movement. The baseline of the signature follows an unnatural uniformity, suggesting the use of a template or tracing guide. Overlay analysis comparing the questioned signature with the subject's DMV renewal signature, dated January 14, 2019, reveals a 97. 3% structural match, a statistical impossibility in naturally produced signatures, which typically vary between 60 and 80% across iterations. It is my professional opinion that the questioned signature was traced from the DMV exemplar. Traced from her driver's license form, the document she signed at the DMV 8 weeks before she walked into Ashworth's office and wrote a will by hand because she knew her husband would try to forge one. She had predicted this. Not the specific method, maybe, but the intent. She knew Greg would attempt to replicate her signature. She knew he would use whatever source was most accessible. And she had prepared for it by creating a will that did not rely on a signature alone, but on 22 pages of her own handwriting, witnessed, notarized, and locked in a safe 70 miles from the man she no longer trusted. Then the printer report arrived. Ashworth had obtained a court order to have the device examined in situ, meaning a technician entered the house under the supervision of a court-appointed officer while Greg was at work. The examination took 40 minutes. Greg never knew it happened. The technician recovered the printer's internal activity log dating back to June 2019, 3 months before my mother's death. The log contained 847 entries. Most were routine. Insurance forms, personal correspondence, a recipe Greg printed from a cooking website in November 2019, pot roast, which struck me as grotesque given that my mother made pot roast every Sunday and he had never once cooked it while she was alive. But entry number 312 was different. September 14, 2019, 11:07 p.m. Action type, scan to device. Document description, single page, text and signature block. A thumbnail image was recovered, low resolution but legible. It showed the signature line of my mother's driver's license renewal form. At 11:07 p.m. on the night we buried my mother, while I lay in the next room crying into her pillow, Greg Lassiter scanned the document he would use to forge her will. The timestamp was 9 hours and 12 minutes after the last guest left the funeral reception. He did not even wait a full day. I read the report in my studio with the lights off and the door closed. The cabinet I had been working on stood half-finished on the workbench. The smell of wood stain hung in the air, familiar and grounding. I pressed my palms flat against the workbench surface and breathed through my nose and counted to 10, because the alternative was driving to Charlottesville and putting my fist through the study window of my mother's house. I did not do that. I called James instead. He answered on the first ring. He always answered on the first ring now, ever since the Dollhouse. What did they find? Everything, I said. I told him about the traced signature, about the printer log, about the 11:07 p.m. timestamp. The line was quiet for a long time. Then James said something low and careful. "What do you want to do?" Greg's memorial garden party is September 14th, 2 weeks from now, the same date every year. I know, 40 people, neighbors, church friends, Mom's UVA colleagues. He invites Judge Patricia Holt. She lives 3 houses down. She has attended every year since Mom died. James was quiet again. Then he said, "Are you asking me if you should go?" "I am asking you if I am wrong for wanting to. You spent 5 years rebuilding your life from nothing, while he spent 5 years lying to everyone you loved." He paused. "Your mother hid that will inside a dollhouse she built with her own hands. She did not do that so you could stay quiet." I set the phone on the workbench and stared at the ceiling. A water stain in the corner looked like a map of a country I had never visited. James did not try to fill the silence. He let it exist between us, warm and steady, the way he let everything exist, without pressure, without agenda, just present. "Okay," I said. "We go." The next 12 days moved with the particular velocity of countdown. Ashworth prepared a presentation folder containing notarized copies of every document: the original will, the forensic examination report, the financial transfer records from Fidelity, the printer activity log with the 11:07 p.m. entry highlighted in yellow, bank statements from Greg's Chase account showing deposits that corresponded to the dates and amounts withdrawn from my mother's accounts, a timeline he had constructed on a single page that laid out Greg's actions in chronological order from the night of the funeral to the present day. 5 years of fraud compressed into black text on white paper. I asked Ashworth if he would come to the party. He declined. "It is better if I am not present," he said. "This is a family matter. My role is legal, not personal." But he offered something else. If Judge Holt is there, she can witness the documents firsthand. A retired circuit court judge verifying authenticity in real time carries weight that no courtroom filing can replicate. He paused. "Your mother knew Patricia Holt. They served on the neighborhood association together. Jolene trusted her." I thought about that. My mother choosing a house on a street where a judge lived, planting roses next to a woman who had spent her career separating truth from deception. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe my mother had spent years building a safety net so intricate that even she could not have predicted which thread would hold the weight when the time came. On the night of September 2nd, 12 days before the party, I lay awake at 3 a.m. staring at the ceiling of our bedroom. James was beside me, breathing the slow rhythm of someone who sleeps with a clear conscience. Noah was in the next room, her nightlight casting a pink glow under the door. The house was silent, except for the ticking of the kitchen clock and the distant rumble of a train crossing the river. "Am I doing the right thing?" I whispered it into the dark, not expecting James to hear. But he stirred, rolled toward me, opened one eye. "Yes," he said. Then he closed his eye, and his breathing steadied, and in 30 seconds he was asleep again. One word, no hesitation. That was enough. If you found out that someone had been lying about you for 5 years, destroying your reputation while living in your mother's house, what would you do? Would you confront them publicly or handle it privately? Tell me in the comments. And if you want to see what happened at that garden party, stay with me. Ashworth confirmed every document was ready. The court filing was sealed. Greg had no idea. In 12 days, he would stand in my mother's garden, surrounded by people who believed his every word, and the truth would walk through the front gate. September 14th, 2024. 5 years to the day. I woke at 5 a.m. out of habit and lay in the dark listening to Noah's breathing through the baby monitor. Soft, rhythmic, untroubled. The breathing of a child who has never been lied to. James was already awake beside me. I could tell by the quality of his stillness. He was not sleeping. He was waiting for me to be ready. I showered and dressed in the navy cotton sheath I had bought for the occasion, $34 from Target. I had considered buying something more expensive, something that would signal success to the people who would be watching. Then I decided against it. I was not going to perform for Greg's audience. I was going to tell the truth. The truth does not require a costume. I put on my mother's pearl stud earrings. They were warm from the dresser where morning light had been touching them through the window. I looked in the mirror and saw a woman I would not have recognized 5 years ago. Not because of the clothes or the earrings, because of the eyes. Steady, clear, finished with waiting. James wore a white button-down and khaki pants, no tie. He carried the manila folder in his left hand, his right hand free so I could reach for it if I needed to. We loaded Noah into her car seat at 8:30 a.m. Claudette was parked at the curb in her 1998 Ford F-150, the one with the peeling paint on the hood, and the passenger seat permanently dusted with sawdust. She had driven from Carytown without being asked. I called her the night before to tell her the plan, and she said, "What time should I be there?" Not, "Should I come?" Not, "Are you sure about this?" Just, "What time?" That is how Claudette operates. She does not question your decisions. She shows up for them. Noah would stay in the truck with Claudette. I did not want my daughter inside that house. Not yet. Not until it was safe. Claudette had brought rice and beans in a thermos, and a coloring book, and a bag of crayons. "She'll be fine," she said when I hesitated at the truck window. "You go do what your mama planned for you to do." She squeezed my hand through the open window. Her palm was rough and warm, calloused from 40 years of working with wood. I squeezed back. Then I turned and lifted the dollhouse from the trunk of our car. It was heavier than I remembered. Not physically. It weighed the same 6 pounds it had always weighed. But it carried something different now. Not just craft and memory and love. Evidence. 5 years of patience sealed behind a false floor. I balanced it against my hip and walked toward the front gate, with James beside me and the manila folder tucked under his arm. The house looked the way it always looked in September. White Victorian, wraparound porch, wisteria climbing the columns in green ropes that would bloom purple in spring. My mother planted that wisteria the year she paid off the mortgage. A celebration, she called it. Not a party, not a dinner. A plant. Something that would grow and outlast and mark the moment she became free. It had outlasted her. The irony was not gentle. The front lawn held approximately 40 people arranged in clusters across the grass, white linen tablecloths on folding tables, glass pitchers of lemonade sweating in the warm afternoon air, a catered spread from Feast Restaurant, the same caterer Greg used every year, the one that cost $2,400 per event. Someone had set up a small table near the garden gate with framed photographs of my mother, her UVA staff portrait, a candid shot from a holiday party, her wedding photo with my father, her first husband, which startled me. Greg had put my father's photo on display, not because he respected the man, but because it reinforced the narrative. Look how long I honored her past. Look how devoted I am to her memory. The garden roses were blooming. Pink Edens, the same variety my mother planted the year I was born. They grew along the fence line in thick clusters, their petals open and fragrant in the midday heat. No one had tended them. I could see the dead canes tangled among the living ones, the suckers growing wild at the base, the spent blooms that should have been pruned weeks ago. But they were alive, stubborn and beautiful and alive, despite neglect. I stopped at the gate and breathed them in. They smelled like Saturday mornings in the yard with my mother, like trowels and potting soil and the sound of her humming while she worked. I heard the whispers before I saw the faces. 2 women standing near the lemonade table. One leaned toward the other. "Is that the daughter? I thought she was overseas. Or was it rehab?" The other woman shook her head. Greg said she had problems, drugs or something. "She does not look like she is on drugs." The first woman studied me. "She looks like Jolene." I gripped the dollhouse tighter and kept walking. Becca was the first person I passed directly. She stood near the porch steps holding a tray of wine glasses, wearing a silk blouse I recognized as my mother's, and earrings I did not. New ones. Purchased, I assumed, with money from my mother's accounts. She saw me and the tray tilted by 2 degrees. A glass slid toward the edge. She caught it without looking, a reflex, but her face lost its practiced hostess composure for a full second. Her eyes moved from my face to the dollhouse, to James, to the folder, and back to my face. She did not speak. She stepped to the side of the porch stairs and let us pass. I did not acknowledge her. I walked up the 3 steps to the porch where the front door stood open and the sounds of the party drifted out through the screen. Near the rose bushes, in a cushioned garden chair positioned for shade and a view of the entire lawn, sat a woman in her early 70s. Silver hair cut close, linen pants and a white blouse, reading glasses folded in her lap. Judge Patricia Holt, retired Charlottesville Circuit Court. 22 years on the bench. 22 years as my mother's neighbor. She watched me cross the lawn with an expression I could not read. Not surprise, not concern, something closer to attention. The focused gaze of a woman who has spent her career observing and who recognizes the particular posture of someone walking toward a reckoning. Then I saw Greg. He stood at the center of the porch, champagne flute in his right hand resting on the railing in a posture of ownership. Brooks Brothers blazer, open collar, the Cartier Santos watch catching September light on his wrist. He was mid-sentence, speaking to a man I recognized as the senior warden from his church, gesturing toward the garden with the ease of a man who had rehearsed this performance 5 times and perfected it. His face was tanned, his hair recently trimmed. He looked like a man in control of his environment. He looked like a man who owned this house. His gaze swept across the lawn the way it always did, a host surveying his domain, and it caught on me the way a needle catches on a scratch in a record. The champagne glass stopped halfway to his lips. His mouth, still shaped around whatever word he had been forming, froze. I watched the recognition arrive in stages. Confusion first, his eyes narrowing, trying to place the woman with the dollhouse. Then identification, the slight backward pull of his head, the involuntary stiffening of his shoulders. Then the scan. His eyes dropped to the dollhouse, rose to the manila folder in James's hand, returned to my face. His free hand, the one resting on the railing, began to tremble. He set the champagne down on the railing ledge. The glass clinked against the wood. The church warden looked at him, then followed his gaze to where I stood at the base of the porch steps. "What are you doing here?" Greg's voice was controlled, pitched low. The voice of a man who does not want nearby guests to sense alarm. I kept my eyes on his. Steady. Level. The way Claudette looked at a piece of damaged furniture before deciding where to begin the repair. Greg recovered fast. He always did. He smiled that public smile, the one he wore like a mask, and said loud enough for the nearest guests to hear, "Bianca, sweetheart, we were not expecting you. Are you feeling better?" He emphasized the word better, like it carried a diagnosis. Like I was a patient who had wandered away from supervision. Like the narrative he had spent 5 years constructing was still the only version of events that mattered. I took the last step onto the porch. The dollhouse rested against my hip. The manila folder was in James's hands 2 feet behind me. The garden roses perfumed the air. 40 pairs of eyes had begun to turn. And somewhere, in a cushioned chair near the bushes, Judge Patricia Holt uncrossed her legs and leaned forward. "I am feeling much better, Greg. Thank you for asking." I set the dollhouse on the nearest garden table. The periwinkle paint caught the afternoon sun. A few guests glanced at it with curiosity. Most were watching my face. I could feel the weight of 40 gazes, some confused, some wary, some carrying the particular discomfort of people who sense they are about to witness something they cannot unsee. I did not look at any of them. I looked at Greg. "I came to return something," I said. My voice was level. Conversational, the volume of someone discussing the weather. "This dollhouse belonged in this house. My mother built it here. It should stay here." Greg's smile held, but his jaw shifted beneath it. The muscle above his left ear pulsed. "That is thoughtful," he said, still performing for the audience. But this is not really the time for a visit, Bianca. We are honoring your mother's memory today. I know what day it is. I opened my hand toward James. He placed the manila folder in my palm. The exchange was smooth, practiced. We had rehearsed it once in the kitchen that morning. Not the words, just the handoff. I wanted my hands free when I needed them and full when it mattered. I opened the folder on the table beside the dollhouse. The cream linen of my mother's will lay on top, the red notary seal bright against the paper. I would like to honor her memory too, I said, by reading her will, her real will. The word real landed the way I intended it to. A stone dropped into still water, ripples reaching every edge of the garden. Greg's composure flickered. His eyes darted to the document, then to the guests, then back to me. His right hand moved to his wrist and adjusted the Cartier watch in a gesture I had seen 100 times, the gesture he made when he was calculating. "That is not necessary," he said. "Your mother's wishes were settled years ago." They were not settled. They were forged. The word cut through the garden. Someone near the lemonade table inhaled sharply. I pulled the will from the folder and held it up. The notary seal faced outward, red as a stop sign. "This is the last will and testament of Jolene Marie Ruby," I said, written in her own hand on March 3rd, 2019. 6 months before she died. Notarized by attorney David Ashworth. Witnessed by his paralegal, Karen Teal. Filed under case number AW-2019-0847. She left everything to me. The house, the investment accounts, the life insurance, everything. Greg stepped forward. His smile was gone. In its place was something harder. She was confused, the medication she was on near the end. She did not know what she was signing. She was not on medication in March, I said. She did not get sick until August. This will was executed 6 months before her diagnosis. I pulled the second document from the folder, a declaration of testamentary capacity signed by her physician, Dr. Helen Woodward, confirming that Jolene Ruby was of sound mind at the time of the consultation. Greg's mouth opened. Nothing came out. I continued. "The document you showed me the night of her funeral, the one you claimed was her will, was examined by a forensic document specialist, Dr. Catherine Voss of Voss Document Analysis in Alexandria." I held up the report. "Her findings are as follows. The signature on your document was traced from my mother's Virginia driver's license renewal form, dated January 14th, 2019. The pen pressure is inconsistent with natural handwriting. The structural match between the two signatures is 97. 3%, a statistical impossibility in authentic signatures." A murmur spread through the crowd. Not whispers this time. Voices. Someone said the word forged, and it carried across the lawn like wind through the roses. The church warden Greg had been speaking to moments earlier took a step away from the porch railing. "That is a lie," Greg said. His voice had risen, not to a shout, but to the register of a man who feels the ground shifting beneath him. "She hired some ambulance chaser to fabricate documents." I did not respond to him. I turned to the guests. My mother worked at UVA for 18 years. She bought this house with my father's life insurance in 2003. She paid off the mortgage in 12 years. She kept her finances separate throughout her second marriage. She saved. She planned. She was not confused, and she was not reckless. I pulled the financial records from the folder. Fidelity Investments account ending in 4471. Between October 2019 and March 2020, Greg Lassiter transferred $214,000 from this account to his personal Chase checking account. An additional $47,000 was withdrawn in cash. Total, $261,000. I laid the spreadsheet on the table next to the will. The column of numbers was visible to anyone standing within 6 feet. A woman in a floral dress craned her neck to read the figures. Her hand went to her mouth. Then I placed the final document on the table, the printer activity log. I pointed to the highlighted entry. September 14th, 2019, 11:07 p.m. This is the internal memory log from the HP LaserJet in the study of this house. At 11:07 on the night of my mother's funeral, a document was scanned. The recovered thumbnail shows the signature line of my mother's driver's license. He created the forged will that night, while I was in the next room. The silence that followed was unlike any silence I have experienced. It was not empty. It was dense, pressurized. The silence of 40 people recalculating 5 years of belief in a single moment. I could hear the roses rustling in the breeze, the faint clink of ice in someone's abandoned lemonade glass, a cardinal singing from the elm tree at the corner of the yard, oblivious to everything below it. A woman near the back of the garden spoke. Her voice was quiet, but it carried. The printer. I heard it that night. I was still at the house helping clean up. I thought he was printing thank you cards. Heads turned. The woman was Mrs. Delacroix, a neighbor who had lived on the street for 30 years. She was looking at Greg with an expression that was not anger, it was revision, the look of someone rewriting a story they had believed for half a decade. Greg lunged for the one defense he had left. I had to protect this family from her reckless decisions. He pointed at the will on the table. Jolene made bad choices. She wanted to leave a 24-year-old girl in charge of $1 million estate. I did what any responsible husband would do. The words landed like a confession dressed as a justification. He had not denied the forgery. He had not denied the transfers. He had explained them, justified them, admitted to them in front of 40 witnesses while believing he was defending himself. Becca appeared at the edge of the porch. She had set down the wine tray. Her face was pale, stripped of the composure she had worn all morning. Daddy would never do that, she said, but her voice wavered on the last word. She looked at the printer log on the table. I watched her eyes find the timestamp, 11:07 p.m., September 14th. Her jaw tightened. She looked at her father. He did not look back. I picked up the will one more time. My mother wrote something at the bottom of this document, I said, in her own hand. In the same blue ink she used for grocery lists and birthday cards and the height measurements she penciled on the hallway doorframe every year until I turned 18. I read it aloud. He will try to take everything. Do not let him. The garden was still. No one was looking at Greg with sympathy. No one was looking at him at all. They were looking at me, or at the documents, or at the dollhouse sitting on the table with its periwinkle paint and tiny glass windows, catching light the way it had in my back seat 5 years ago when I drove away from this house, with nothing. My mother said I was the only thing in this house worth protecting, I said. She was right. I closed the folder. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. Greg looked around the garden. 40 faces. Not one of them was offering him what they had offered for 5 years. Not sympathy, not admiration, not the benefit of the doubt. He set his jaw, adjusted his watch one more time, turned toward the front door. A voice stopped him. Calm, measured, carrying the particular authority of a woman who had spent 3 decades in a courtroom and never lost control of one. Mr. Lassiter. Judge Patricia Holt had risen from her garden chair. She stood beside the rose bushes my mother had planted, her reading glasses now perched on her nose, her eyes fixed on Greg with the steady focus of someone who has just reviewed the evidence and reached a verdict. I have sat on the bench for 30 years, Mr. Lassiter. I know what a forged signature looks like, and I know what a guilty man looks like. She paused. I am looking at both. Greg's hand gripped the doorframe. His knuckles were white. The Cartier watch reflected a thin bar of sunlight across the porch ceiling as his arm trembled. I would not leave town if I were you, Judge Holt added. Then she sat back down, folded her glasses into her lap, and turned her face toward the roses, as though the matter were settled. Greg walked inside the house and closed the door. Not a slam, a click. The quiet retreat of a man who had run out of audience. The party did not resume. It dissolved. Guests set down their lemonade glasses and gathered their things with the measured urgency of people who understand they have witnessed something that will reshape every conversation in this neighborhood for years. No one knocked on the front door to say goodbye to Greg. No one asked if he was all right. They simply left, one car at a time, gravel crunching under tires, until the driveway was empty and the garden held nothing but abandoned plates and the scent of roses and the particular silence that follows a detonation. James collected the folder from the garden table. I picked up the dollhouse. We walked through the gate without looking back. Claudette was leaning against her truck at the curb, arms folded. Noah asleep in the car seat behind her, with a green crayon still clutched in one hand. Claudette studied my face for 2 seconds and said one word: good. Then she opened her door, started the engine, and followed us back to Richmond. She did not ask what happened. She had read it in my posture. In 40 years of assessing damaged things, Claudette had learned to distinguish between objects that were broken and objects that had finally been set right. The court proceedings began the following Monday. Ashworth filed the authenticated will with Charlottesville Circuit Court on September 19, 2024. Case number 2024-PR-0914. Greg retained a defense attorney named Donald Vickers from a firm in Albemarle County. Vickers filed a challenge on October 1st, arguing diminished testamentary capacity and undue influence by Ashworth himself. The challenge was aggressive on paper. It lasted 11 days. Ashworth dismantled it in 3 hearings. He presented the holographic will in my mother's handwriting. He presented the notarized duplicate from his office safe. He presented the witness testimony of Karen Teal, his paralegal, who confirmed she watched my mother sign both copies with a steady hand and clear eyes on March 3, 2019. He presented the capacity evaluation from my mother's physician, Dr. Doma, Helen Woodward, who documented that Jolene Ruby scored in the 94th percentile on the cognitive assessment administered the same week. And he presented the forensic report from Dr. Catherine Voss, the 97.3% structural match between the forged signature and the DMV exemplar. The inconsistent pen pressure, the traced baseline. Science does not argue, it states. Vickers withdrew the challenge on October 12th. His withdrawal motion cited irreconcilable evidentiary deficiencies, which Ashworth told me over the phone translated roughly to his client's own evidence proved our case faster than ours did. Judge Raymond Kessler authenticated the handwritten will on October 14th. The ruling was 4 pages. The relevant paragraph stated that the holographic will of Jolene Marie Ruby, dated March 3, 2019, satisfies all requirements under Virginia Code Section 64.2-404 and is hereby admitted to probate. The previously submitted document is voided as fraudulent. I read those words at my studio workbench at 3:47 in the afternoon, with sawdust on my sleeves and my mother's pearl earrings warm against my neck. Ownership of the house at 1847 Belmont Avenue transferred to my name on October 21st. The deed was recorded with the Charlottesville City Assessor. I received the certified copy by mail 3 days later. I held it at my kitchen table and looked at my name in the space where my mother's had been. The paper felt heavier than it should have, not from the weight of the document, from the weight of what it represented. 24 years of belonging to a house I had been told was never mine. Greg was ordered to vacate within 60 days, November 20th deadline. Ashworth filed a civil suit simultaneously for the $261,000 in misappropriated funds. The complaint detailed every transfer from the Fidelity account, every cash withdrawal, the dates, the amounts, the Chase account deposits that corresponded dollar for dollar. The math was clean. The paper trail was cleaner. My mother had kept meticulous records, and Ashworth had preserved them like evidence in a case he always knew would come. Then the district attorney's office stepped in. I did not ask them to. Ashworth told me that Judge Holt had contacted the Commonwealth's attorney the morning after the garden party. A retired judge making a referral carries a particular weight in a small legal community. The DA opened a criminal investigation into forgery and fraud. Greg was not arrested, not yet. But subpoenas were issued for the printer, the forged document, and Greg's bank records. His attorney Vickers advised cooperation. Whether Greg cooperated, I did not know and did not ask. I learned about the aftermath the way I had learned about most things in Greg's world, through other people. Through Lorraine, mostly, who called me every Sunday now, rebuilding the weekly ritual she and my mother had shared for decades. Through the quiet network of neighbors and former colleagues who had watched Greg perform for 5 years and were now comparing notes. The church asked him to step down from the vestry on October 28th. The senior warden, the same man Greg had been speaking to on the porch when I arrived at the garden party, delivered the request in person. Lorraine heard the details from a friend who attended the same parish. They did not accuse him publicly, she told me. They just said they thought it was best for the congregation if he took some time away. He has not been back since. That was 6 weeks ago. His employer, a regional insurance company where he had worked as a claims adjuster for 14 years, placed him on administrative leave the first week of November. Pending the outcome of the criminal investigation, Lorraine reported. She heard it from a neighbor whose husband worked in the same industry. They cannot have a claims adjuster under investigation for fraud. The irony is apparently lost on no one. Neighbors on Belmont Avenue stopped waving when Greg drove past. The woman 3 houses down who had organized a meal train for him after my mother's funeral quietly removed him from the neighborhood email list. The couple across the street, who had attended every memorial garden party for 5 years, did not acknowledge him when he collected his mail. Greg had spent half a decade curating a public identity built on grief and generosity. The garden party had stripped it away in an afternoon. Without the narrative, he was just a man in a house that did not belong to him, wearing a watch he could not afford, driving a car purchased with stolen money. The Audi Q5 appeared on Craigslist the second week of November. Glacier white, 2022 model, listed at $38,000. Lorraine sent me the screenshot without comment. I looked at the listing for a long time. He bought that car 11 months after my mother died, during the same period he was draining her Fidelity account. The leather seats, the panoramic sunroof, every feature funded by a dead woman's savings. Now he was selling it to pay Donald Vickers' legal fees. The math of consequence is slower than the math of theft, but it arrives at the same sum. Becca's Instagram account went private on October 30th. Lorraine told me why. Someone, she did not know who, had commented on an old photo of Becca wearing my mother's cream cashmere cardigan. The comment read, "Is that not the dead woman's sweater?" 4 words. Becca deleted the photo, then the account went dark. Her curated life, the brunch photos and vacation posts, and pictures of herself in my mother's house wearing my mother's clothes, vanished behind a privacy wall. I did not feel satisfaction. I felt the hollow recognition of watching someone realize that the life they had been living was built on a foundation that belonged to someone else. Lorraine called me on a Thursday evening in late October. I was giving Noah a bath. James answered and brought me the phone with a look that said, "You should take this." I dried my hands on a towel and sat on the edge of the tub while Noah splashed rubber ducks and sang a song she had invented about a purple fish. Lorraine was crying. Not the polished tears of a woman managing a social situation. Raw, messy sounds that came from somewhere deep. "Bianca," she said between breaths, "your mother planned this. She knew he would do it. She knew exactly who he was, and she planned for it 5 years in advance." She paused. 5 years, Bianca. She hid that will in a dollhouse she built with her own hands because she knew it was the one thing he would throw away. She outsmarted him from the grave. I looked at Noah in the bathtub. Her dark hair was plastered to her forehead. She was concentrating on stacking 2 rubber ducks on top of each other, a task that required more engineering than a 3-year-old possessed, but that she attempted with the stubborn focus she had inherited from someone she would never meet. "She did not outsmart him," I said quietly. "She protected me. That is not the same thing." Lorraine was quiet for a moment. Then she said, You sound just like her. I pressed the phone against my chest and closed my eyes and let that sentence live inside me for as long as it needed to. 2 weeks after the court ruling, my phone lit up with a name I had not seen in 5 years. Becca Lassiter. I stared at the screen through 3 rings. The name carried the weight of a cashmere cardigan worn without permission, a bedroom window where a stranger stood watching me leave my own home. 5 years of silence that was never neutral. It was chosen. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me pick up. Maybe it was the part of me that still fixes broken things. Maybe it was the part that knows not every broken thing is worth fixing, but believes you should at least look before you decide. Bianca. Becca's voice was smaller than I remembered, thinner, stripped of the bright confidence she had worn like borrowed clothing for 5 years. Can we meet? I did not answer immediately. I stood in Noah's bathroom with a towel in one hand and the phone pressed to my ear and let the silence stretch long enough for her to feel its weight. A rubber duck floated in the draining tub behind me. Noah had already padded to her bedroom, where James was reading her a story about a bear who lost his hat. Why? I asked. Because I have something of yours, and because I need to say something. I do not need anything from you. I know. Her voice caught on the second word. But I have it anyway. Can I buy you a coffee? I thought about the woman standing in my bedroom window wearing my mother's cardigan. The woman who had moved into my house the same morning I was pushed out of it. The woman who had blocked me on every platform and never questioned the story her father fed her. Every instinct I had built over 5 years told me to say no. Saturday, I said, 10 a.m. There is a coffee shop on Carey Street in Richmond called Roastology. I will be there for 30 minutes. I arrived 12 minutes early and chose a table by the window where I could see the door. Old habit. Claudette once told me that the first thing a restorer does when examining a piece is identify the exits. Not because you plan to run, but because knowing you can leave makes you brave enough to stay. I ordered a black coffee and waited. Becca walked in at 10:02. She looked different. Not just tired, though she was that. Changed. The silk blouse and designer earrings were gone. She wore a plain gray sweater and jeans, and shoes that had seen better seasons. Her hair was pulled back without product. No jewelry on her wrists, her neck, her ears. None. I noticed the absence the way you notice a room after the furniture has been removed. The outline of what used to be there is sometimes more visible than the thing itself. She sat across from me and ordered a small drip coffee, $2.75, the cheapest thing on the menu. She held the cup with both hands as though drawing warmth from it, even though the shop was heated and the November air outside could not reach us here. Her nails were unpainted. Her cuticles were ragged. The hands of someone who had recently started doing her own work. "Thank you for meeting me," she said. I did not respond. I let her find her way. She stared at her coffee for a long time. 8 seconds, I counted. "I did not know," she said, "about the will, about what my dad did. I believed him when he said your mom left everything to him. I had no reason to—" She stopped herself. That is not true. I had reasons. I just did not look at them because looking would have meant losing the house and the car and the life I had been living, for free, in a dead woman's home. It was the most honest sentence anyone in her family had ever spoken to me. I set down my cup. "You did not know," I repeated. She nodded. "But you did not ask." The distinction landed. I watched it hit her the way a truth hits someone who has been rehearsing a softer version for weeks. "No," she said quietly. "I did not ask. I moved into your bedroom the morning you left. I wore your mother's clothes. I posted pictures of myself in her house like I belonged there. I told my friends it was my family's home." She pressed her fingertips against her eyelids. "I did not ask because asking would have cost me everything I was getting for free." The coffee shop hummed around us. A barista steamed milk with a hiss that sounded like a long exhale. 2 students at the next table argued about a philosophy assignment. Outside the window, a woman walked past pushing a stroller through the thin November rain. Normal life continuing, while two strangers who shared nothing but a dead woman's house sat across from each other, trying to locate the boundary between damage and repair. Becca reached into the canvas bag on the chair beside her and pulled out an object I recognized immediately: a rose gold iPad in a leather case. The leather was worn at the corners. A small sticker on the back, a yellow daisy, placed there by a woman who kept her filing cabinet alphabetized, but put flower stickers on her electronics because she believed serious things should have at least one playful detail. I found this in the closet of the guest bedroom, Becca said. The one I was using. It was on a shelf behind a stack of sweaters. My dad told me to throw out everything that was not useful when I moved in. I kept it because I thought it might have music on it. She slid it across the table. It does have music, she said, but it also has her iCloud backup. Text messages, emails, notes. I opened it 3 weeks ago. My throat tightened. I touched the leather case. The daisy sticker was peeling at one edge. I pressed it back down with my thumb, a gesture so automatic it frightened me. The muscle memory of caring for my mother's things had survived 5 years of separation. The messages between your mom and your Aunt Lorraine, Becca continued, from 2018 and 2019. They talked about everything, about my dad, about the money, about the will. She swallowed. Your mom knew exactly what he was. She wrote to Lorraine in January 2019 that she was scared of what Greg would do after she was gone. She said she needed to protect you. I held the iPad against my chest, the way I had held my mother's letter the day I found it in the dollhouse. The glass screen was cool through my shirt. Somewhere inside this device was my mother's voice, preserved in text, waiting for me. Her fear, her planning, her love expressed not in grand gestures, but in the careful, quiet work of a woman building a safety net, thread by thread, while the man she married stood in the next room, counting what he planned to take. "Why are you giving this to me?" I asked. "Because it is yours." Becca met my eyes. "Everything in that house was yours. I just did not want to see it." I set the iPad on the table between us, the daisy sticker faced up, cheerful and stubborn, like the woman who placed it there. I looked at Becca and tried to find the right words for what I needed to say. Not anger. I had spent that currency years ago. Not forgiveness. That was not mine to offer yet. Not because she was undeserving, but because trust is not a door you open with one gesture, no matter how well-intentioned. "I do not hate you," I said. "I want you to hear that clearly. I do not hate you." Her eyes filled. "But I cannot trust you. Not because of who you are today, sitting here in a gray sweater ordering the cheapest coffee, but because of who you were for 5 years. 5 years of silence, Becca. 5 years of living in my mother's house and never once wondering if the story you were told was true." She nodded. Tears slid down her cheeks, but she did not wipe them. She let them fall onto the table between her hands. "If that changes," I continued, "if trust comes back, it will be because you earned it, not because I owed it, not because we shared a house or a last name or a father, because you did the work, day after day, the way real things are built." She nodded again. "Okay," she whispered. "I understand." I finished my coffee. I picked up the iPad. I stood. Then I paused, because there was one more thing, and it mattered. "Thank you for bringing this," I said. "It does not fix what happened, but it matters that you chose to give it back instead of deleting it." She looked up at me. "Your mom was a good person, Bianca. I wish I had known her when she was alive, instead of just living in her closet." I left the coffee shop and walked to my car in the rain. The iPad sat on the passenger seat. My mother's daisy sticker faced the ceiling. I did not open the messages yet. I would. Soon. But not in a parking lot in November. Some conversations with the dead deserve a better setting than a dashboard. 4 days later, an envelope arrived at my studio. Plain white paper, no letterhead, no embossed logo. The return address listed a law office in Albemarle County. Donald Vickers. Inside was a single typed paragraph. Greg Lassiter requested a meeting with his stepdaughter to discuss a personal resolution of outstanding family matters. He wished to express his perspective on recent events and hoped to find a path toward mutual understanding. Mutual understanding. The phrase tasted like something Greg would say. Reasonable on the surface, hollow beneath. I photographed the letter, emailed it to Ashworth, and called his office. His assistant picked up. Ashworth was in court. I left a message. 3 hours later, he returned my call. "What would you like me to communicate?" he asked. "One sentence," I said. "There is nothing to discuss." Ashworth paused. He said it the way he said most things, with the precision of a man who weighs every word before releasing it. "I will draft the response today." That was the last time Greg Lassiter attempted to contact me. Not through attorneys, not through intermediaries, not through the mail. The silence he received was the same silence he had built around me 5 years ago. The only difference was that this time, I was the one who chose it. The house sat empty for 3 weeks after Greg moved out. I drove up from Richmond on a Saturday morning in November with James and Noah in the back seat. I had not seen the front door since the day I was kicked out holding a dollhouse and wearing my mother's pearl earrings. The key turned on the first try. I do not know why I expected resistance, some final obstacle between me and the threshold, but the lock gave way without protest, and the door swung open into the foyer, and the smell reached me before the light did. Lavender and wood polish, and something underneath both of those, something that no amount of time or tenancy can erase. The smell of the woman who lived here longest, who cared for every surface, who placed sachets in closets and rubbed lemon oil into banisters, and filled rooms with a presence so specific that 5 years of a stranger's occupation could not overwrite it. I stood in the doorway for a long time. James waited on the porch behind me with Noah on his hip. He did not rush me. He understood that what I was doing was not walking into a house. It was walking back into a life I had been expelled from at 24, with a suitcase and a dollhouse and the belief that I deserved nothing better. The foyer looked the same. Hardwood floors, coat hooks by the door, the narrow table where my mother kept a bowl of keys and a vase that always held something from the garden. The vase was still there, empty now, dusty. I touched its rim with one finger and felt the grit of neglect. I moved through each room slowly. The kitchen. My mother's Wedgwood china still stacked behind the glass cabinet doors, every piece accounted for. The window above the sink framing the garden, where pink Eden roses bloomed in defiant clusters along the fence, untended, unpruned, alive. I stood at that window and whispered to no one. They survived. So did I. The hallway. The pencil marks on the doorframe, 12 of them, one for each year from age 5 through 17, each followed by a date in my mother's handwriting and a tiny star beside the last one. 5'6", April 2013. I pressed my palm against the highest mark and felt the grooves her pencil had made in the wood. Shallow, permanent, indelible. The way a mother's love marks a house. The living room. The empty corner where the Steinway-style piano had never stood, but where the dollhouse belonged. I set it on the mantelpiece above the fireplace, periwinkle blue against the white-painted brick. The tiny glass windows caught the November light and scattered it across the wall in small, bright diamonds. Home. The dollhouse was home. Then the kitchen drawer. I opened it, looking for nothing in particular, a habit from childhood, the way you open drawers in a house you know by heart, just to confirm the geography of memory. Inside, among takeout menus and rubber bands and a collection of twist ties my mother saved because waste was a concept she did not tolerate, I found a recipe card. Lined 3x5, yellowed at the edges. My mother's handwriting in blue ballpoint. Lemon pound cake. 2 cups sugar, 3 cups flour. 6 eggs, room temperature. The juice and zest of 2 lemons. A note at the bottom in smaller script, Bianca's favorite, double the glaze. I held that card against my chest and breathed and let the kitchen hold me the way kitchens do when they remember who belongs in them. Lorraine told me the rest over the phone in the weeks that followed. I did not seek the information. She offered it in small installments, the way you deliver news to someone who has already absorbed enough shock for one lifetime. Greg's insurance company terminated his employment on November 30th, effective immediately. 14 years dissolved in a single HR meeting. The criminal investigation remained open. The district attorney had not filed charges yet, but Ashworth told me the evidence was sufficient for 2 counts of forgery and 1 count of fraud. Virginia classified forgery as a Class 5 felony. The potential sentence was 1 to 10 years. Greg sold the Audi Q5 for $34,000, less than he listed it for, to cover Vickers' fees. He moved into a 1-bedroom apartment in Waynesboro, 40 minutes west of Charlottesville, a town where no one knew his name or his story. Not yet. Becca returned to Short Pump. She took a job at a retail store, $13.50 an hour. She did not contact me again. I did not contact her. The door was not locked, but it was not open either. It was simply there, waiting for someone to demonstrate that they deserved to walk through it. I do not know if Greg will go to prison. I do not know if Becca will ever become someone capable of honest connection. I do not know if the cousins and neighbors and church members who believed Greg's lies for 5 years have fully recalibrated their understanding of what happened. Those are not my questions to answer. She brought a pot of Haitian rice and beans large enough to feed 15 people and a bottle of Barbancourt rum she said was medicinal. She walked through the front door, looked around the foyer, looked at me, and said, "The bones are good." Lorraine arrived an hour later with 2 cardboard boxes of photo albums spanning 30 years. We spread them across the dining room table, and I saw my mother's face in 100 variations. Young and sunburned at the beach, laughing at a holiday table, kneeling in the garden with dirt on her knees and a rose in her hand, holding a newborn me in a hospital bed, her eyes swollen with exhaustion and something larger than exhaustion, something that has no name in any language I know. James strung lights along the porch railing while Noah ran circles around the garden, chasing a squirrel she had named Gerald, a coincidence that made Lorraine laugh so hard she had to sit down. That evening, after the rice and beans were eaten and the albums were closed and Claudette had fallen asleep on the living room sofa with her boots still on, James called me to the mantelpiece. He was holding something small between his thumb and forefinger, a tiny carved heart. Wooden, no bigger than a thumbnail. I found it in the dollhouse, he said, in the attic room, tucked behind the compartment where the will was hidden. She must have put it there at the same time. I took the heart from his hand. The carving was rough, done quickly, probably with a pocket knife. But it was deliberate. My mother had placed a tiny wooden heart inside the hiding place alongside the document that would protect me. The evidence and the love, sealed together, inseparable. James had already threaded a thin silver chain through a hole drilled in the heart's center. He held it up. "For the tree," he said. "Or for you." I took the chain. I hung the tiny heart beside the dollhouse's front door, the one I had repaired at Claudette's workbench 4 years ago, with steady hands and wood glue and the patience my mother taught me before I was old enough to understand what patience was for. I used to believe that love was something you proved, that if you were good enough, quiet enough, small enough, the people who were supposed to love you would eventually see your value. I spent 24 years trying to earn a seat at a table that had already been cleared. I spent 5 more years believing I had been left nothing. What my mother taught me, not through words spoken in a kitchen, but through a will hidden in a dollhouse and a letter sealed with wax and a tiny carved heart tucked behind a false floor, is that love is not earned. It is built. The way you build a dollhouse, one room at a time. With care, with patience, with hinges that work and glass that lets the light in. And when someone tries to tear it down, when they sell the piano and forge the will and tell the world you are broken, the thing you built still stands. Because craftsmanship outlasts cruelty. Because the things people throw away tell you more about them than the things they keep. Setting boundaries is not betrayal. It is the architecture of self-respect. The walls are not built from anger. They are built from the understanding that you cannot restore a relationship the same way you restore a chair. You can glue a broken joint. You can match the grain and sand the surface smooth. But if the wood is rotten at the center, no amount of finish will hold. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself and for the broken thing is to acknowledge that it cannot be fixed and to build something new in its place. My mother understood this. She built me a new foundation and hid it inside the one thing she knew I would keep. Thank you for staying with me on Sophia Told Stories. If this story meant something to you, please subscribe and hit the notification bell. Drop a comment telling me, have you ever found something that changed everything? And check the description for more stories like this one. December. The house is quiet. The porch lights glow amber through the wisteria, bare now in winter, but still gripping the columns with the tenacity of something that intends to bloom again. Inside, the Wedgwood china is washed and stacked. The photo albums are shelved. Claudette's rice pot is clean and waiting for its next Friday. The dollhouse sits on the mantelpiece, periwinkle blue, its tiny heart ornament catching firelight. And upstairs, in a bedroom repainted the same periwinkle, walls the color of something handmade and chosen, Noah sleeps. I pull the quilt to her chin. Her dark hair fans across the pillow. Her breathing is slow and even. The rhythm of a child who has never been lied to, who has never been told she is not enough, who fell asleep in a house that belongs to the people who love her. I lean down. My lips brush her forehead. The pearl earrings press cool against my jaw. The room smells like lavender and fresh paint and the faintest ghost of Shalimar. You are the only thing in this house worth protecting, I whisper. Noah does not stir. She does not need to hear it. The house hears it. The walls hold it. The dollhouse on the mantelpiece holds it. And somewhere, in whatever quiet place the dead go when they are finished watching, my mother holds it too. I stand. I close the door softly. I walk downstairs to the kitchen where James is drying the last dish, and I sit at the table where my mother measured flour and zested lemons and wrote my name on a recipe card in blue ink. And I am home.